Hello, and welcome to the Kathleen Spracklin podcast. I am a woman on a mission to assemble a cadre of writers, thinkers, and teachers who are transforming the world one character at a time. And it all starts with one thing, a deep understanding of human motivation, what makes people do what they do, and the forces that drive them. This is episode 27, and we're going to be continuing with the subgroups within the remaining character trait groups. Yesterday, we took a look at the empathy group, the largest group of character traits within the taxonomy of the character traits. We saw 13 character traits in the empathy group, and we saw how they could be subdivided into 4 subgroups. And we talked about the rationale that defined the subgroups and why it made sense to divide the 13 character traits into those groups. Well, tonight we're going to look at the insight, the resilience, the balance group, the remaining groups. And we'll take a look at the subgroups that are present there and the rationale for dividing those character trait groups into their respective subgroups. We'll begin with the balance group. The balance group of character traits, as you might recall, are the group of character traits that concern our relationship with ourselves. And the interesting thing about the balance subgroup is that there's 2 ways to fail. On the one side, you could fail with letting things get too loose and out of control, and we call that the chaos side. And the other side is where things become too tightly controlled, and we call that the side of rigidity. That's why it's a balance trait, because you have to perform a balancing act between the 2 extremes. Well, let's take a look at the subgroups within the balance group of character traits. The first group that we'll take a look at are what we might call the self-assessment subgroup. The character traits in the self-assessment subgroup have to do with having a correct understanding of oneself. And the honesty character trait within that group has to do with accepting the truths about ourselves, being aware of them, and not denying them, but on the other hand, also not feeling that our destiny is tightly controlled by our history. A companion trait to that is the humility subgroup, which recognizes that our gifts were given to us. They're not the product of our own efforts, and therefore that also puts our self-assessment appropriately in terms of our relationship with other people, where we can look at maybe the things where we were gifted and not be quite so ready to pat ourselves on the back for something which is just a gift. The next group that we would look at are the self-regulation character traits. These are the ones that you normally think of when you think of the balance group. Moderation, orderliness, self-control. These are the character traits that govern self-mastery. Although, truth to tell, all of the character traits in the balance group are about self-mastery. And if you achieve a balance in all of those character traits, you really have achieved a high level of self-mastery. But the self-regulation group are the ones that seem very tightly appropriate to self-mastery, orderliness, self-control, and moderation. The third group in the resilience, in the balance group of character traits is the attention group. And the attention group is a rather interesting one because it has 2 tightly very similar character traits which reflect 2 aspects of attention. The meekness subgroup is content within oneself so that our attention can be focused on the needs of others. Whereas the modesty subgroup has to do with how much of other people's attention do we want, need, or crave. Let's move on then to the next group. The next group of character traits is the resilience group. This is the group that we most commonly think of under the general heading of courage. But when we break it down and we look at the subgroups within it, we find there is one subgroup that seems especially associated with courage, and that is the group of constancy, perseverance, and patience. Constancy is plowing through the tedium of everyday life. Going the long haul when it's just the plain repetition that is delaying our gratification, and there's a long path, and just plowing through it anyway. Perseverance has to do with running into obstacles. What are we going to do? These are the obstacles in the path of our goals. Are we going to be able to surmount those obstacles? Are they going to stop us? The third aspect of the courage, a character trait within the courage subgroup, is patience. And patience has to do with suffering, the current suffering that you're facing. Both constancy and perseverance involve a fair amount of suffering, and patience gets you through it. And whereas constancy and perseverance are both about achieving your goals, patience applies also to situations that sidetrack us from our goals. So it is a very necessary part of courage as well. The other subgroup within the resilience group is what we might call the power group. The power group is magnificence and magnanimity. Magnificence is taking the lid off our natural greatness. Mankind was made to be great. We hold the lid down on magnificence and tamp it down lest we become great. So we do a lot of effort to keep ourselves from having the greatness that we could naturally have if we weren't restraining it. But magnificence can go off the rails very easily, and magnanimity is its guardian angel. The job of magnanimity is to be a watchdog over magnificence and make sure that we are achieving a good aim and that we are crediting others who also play a role in achieving that goal. The final subgroup that we'll take a look at in this taxonomy is the subgroup of the insight group. The insight group is very small. It only has 3 character traits, and they are all tightly grouped. There really is only one subgroup in the insight group, and it contains the whole insight group. So whether you think of it as having a subgroup that's the same as the group or not having a subgroup at all doesn't make too much difference. But if you really want the consistency of every group being made up of subgroups, then it does make some sense to talk about the insight group having a subgroup that's the size of the whole group. We might call it the wisdom subgroup, because all of the character traits in insight have to do with giving us general wisdom. Circumspection involves looking around and assessing the situation around us accurately. Foresight has to do with making predictions of what our behaviors might lead to in the future. And docility crosses the divide when circumspection and foresight are not enough, and we do not have within our own powers the ability to either see the current situation accurately or to be able to forecast into the future. Docility adds another element to it, the element of knowing when it's time to get some outside assistance. So that completes the taxonomy of the groups within the groups, and a little bit about each character trait, not much really at all. But if we're going to pose a taxonomy, there are 2 things involved. One, the taxonomy should have the clear elements of a taxonomy, which I believe we've met, and the other element is we have to put it to the test, so to speak, against other classification systems and other taxonomies that might be proposed for the character traits. Is ours complete? Is ours consistent? Is ours missing anything? Does ours have any redundancies? And so we'll take looking at other systems and other taxonomies, and that will be quite a fun adventure. I believe that the system will hold up quite well, but nothing can be said until you put it to the test. So maybe we'll start that tomorrow, or maybe we'll take a side trip. We'll see. Bye-bye.